Okay, greetings everyone. Thank you for electing to spend some time with me this evening. And I kind of will forewarn you, this may be a little bit long talk tonight because I've got a lot of stuff to cover. But we're going to talk about Diurnal Raptors of Nevada. Diurnal, of course, you know, meaning active during the day. And that refers to the hawks, not only the hawks, but the falcons, the eagles, and marsh hawks and things like that. So when we talk about hawks, we refer to them as raptors. The word raptor comes from the Latin raptore, which means to ravage or plunder. And we recognize raptors because of their strong hooked beaks and their strong talons. And if you've ever seen a hawk tearing apart one of its prey items, then you know what we mean by to ravage or plunder. So I think it's a very appropriate name for them. Raptors are basically monomorphic except for size. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, monomorphic, mono means one, morphic refers to morphology, which, as far as we're concerned, refers to the appearance of the bird. So monomorphic means one appearance as far as the sexes are concerned. The male and the female basically look alike. If the male and the female look different, we say they are dimorphic, di meaning two. And there are a couple of raptors that are dimorphic, but most of them are monomorphic, except for size. It's a general rule that females are larger than males. So among the raptors, we have both diurnal and nocturnal raptors, nocturnal raptors being the owls, of course, which we're not going to talk about tonight. We're going to do the diurnal raptors, which includes the hawks, which we divide into budios and accipiters, the falcons, the harriers, the osprey, the eagles, and the kites. And we don't normally get kites here in northern Nevada, so we aren't going to talk about kites tonight unless somebody has any questions about them afterwards. Now, if I were doing this talk live with you, which I wish I were, I would bring down a whole bunch of taxidermy mounts to show you. If you've ever been up to the Galena Creek Visitor Center, or if you haven't, go up the Mount Rose Highway, get off the I-80 exit, and about 5.5 miles up from that exit, on the right-hand side, you'll see a sign that says Galena Creek Visitor Center. Once this pandemic is over and the visitor center is open again, go on in there and you'll see over 200 taxidermy mounts of birds, which includes a lot of taxidermy mounts of hawks. And I would be bringing these hawk specimens down, or at least some of them, so we could actually see the relative sizes of the hawks and see which ones are bigger than the others and so on. But since I can't do that, what I'm going to try to do, I hope that I have done, on every slide, I will show you the measurement of the length of the bird in inches. And when we measure birds' length, we do it from the tip of the bill to the tip of the tail. I'm also going to include the wingspan in inches. That's usually how it's given, but I've converted the wingspan to feet. And by wingspan, we mean the distance from the tip of one outstretched wing all the way across the body to the tip of the other outstretched wing. So look for those measurements on each of the slides that I show you. And keep in mind, since we're talking about taxidermy mounts, we're always looking for dead birds, okay? I'm the chair of the education committee. If you ever find a dead bird that's in good shape, put it in a plastic bag, squeeze out all the air, put it in the freezer with a piece of paper in there with your name, the date, and the location, so I know who the collector was and when and where it was collected. Then contact me at this email address. Now that looks like kind of a nail-biting name, but it's actually very easy to remember. It's the former Lahontan Audubon Society Vice President, okay? Former LASVP at gmail.com. Or contact me at my home phone number. If nobody answers, please leave a message and I'll get back to you. So at any rate, with that in mind, let's start looking at hawks of northern Nevada. We'll start with the budios. Now there are 5 different groups, 5 different species of hawks that are known as budios. And why do we call them budios? Well, it's because they all belong to this group called the budios. If you remember taking biology, maybe in high school or college, you may remember what goes into what we call a scientific name. The first name is the genus name, like Budio, followed by the species name, like Lineatus or Swainson or whatever. So the species name indicates that all of these birds look different than any other species, but they all share enough common characteristics to be put together in one group, a group known as a genus, and in this case, it's the genus Budio. So here we have these 5 Budios, as they're called, that we're going to talk about one after another. The word Budio comes from a Latin word that means buzzard or hawk, and they're the hawks that sort of have a chunky body, generally about 17 to 23 inches in length. They have broad wings and short tails, and they're the ones you usually see as soaring hawks. But an important key for identifying them when they're perched, the tail does not extend much beyond the wingtips, like this. So this is a typical Budio. Notice the sort of chunky body. Notice how short that tail is. It doesn't project much beyond the folded wingtips. Now, the Budios, as I say, are the ones that are usually soaring in the sky. So you see them with these broad wings and short tails like this typical representative, the red-tailed hawk. And they differ from what we call the accipiters. The accipiters, that's the Latin word that means hawk or bird of prey, comes from the Latin word accipere, which means to grasp. These guys have got bodies that are more slender than the Budios, and the wings are shorter and they're more rounded. The accipiters have relatively long tails with several bands on the tail. They have a flap glide pattern. Usually don't soar. They're called ambush birds because they often sort of sit in a bush or a tree and then wait for a smaller bird to come by and then go out and ambush it. Another tip for identifying them is when they are perched, the tail extends well beyond the wingtips, like this. Here's an accipiter on the left. Notice how long that tail is, way beyond the tips of the wings. They've got several bands that go across the tail, so long tail that extends beyond the wingtips, as compared to Budios that have these short tails that don't extend much beyond the wingtips. So hawks are divided into 2 groups, the Budios and the accipiters. Let's take a look at Budios first. Travel around in the outside area somewhere, you're liable to see a bird like this sitting on a fence post or a tree branch or in a power pole or something. Even from a distance, you can see chunky body and short tail. That will tell you that that's a Budio. And again, if they're soaring way up high in the sky with those short tails and broad wings, you know you've got a Budio, not an accipiter. Now, red-tailed hawk. This is the most common Budio we have here. This will be number 1 on our Budio list. Budio jamaicensis. These guys are resident, although we can get migrants coming in during the wintertime. Obviously, red-tailed hawk because of the red tail. Again, monomorphic, except females are larger than males. So notice the length measurements. Females would be the ones that are 22 inches tall, whereas the males would be the ones only 17 inches tall. And if you want to identify a red-tailed hawk without seeing the red tail, here's your mantra: dark head, light breast, and then a varying amount of dark going across the belly, what we call a belly band. So the typical plumage pattern is dark, light, dark, dark, light, dark, okay? Memorize that. Say it when you go to bed tonight. That's your mantra: dark, light, dark, dark, light, dark, okay? This is what we call a light morph, red tail. I'll show you a different morph later. When they're up in the sky, if you see the red tail, you know you got a red-tailed hawk. If you see the dark, light, dark, you know you have a red-tailed hawk. But another key characteristic of the red-tailed hawks is see these dark lines along the front part of the wing? These are called the dark leading edges, or if you want to impress your friends, patagial marks. Hey guys, did you see those patagial marks? Ooh, man, this gal really knows what she's talking about, doesn't she? Red-tailed hawks are the only ones out here that have dark patagial marks. So another characteristic of red-tailed hawk, allowing you to identify them. But here's another red-tailed hawk. This is what we call a dark morph. Notice, dark all over. Sometimes it's called a melanistic plumage because it's melanin, the pigment melanin, that makes all that darkness. Even on this dark morph, notice it still seems to have a dark, light, dark sort of a pattern. Not all of them do, but this one certainly does. How do I know it's a red-tailed hawk? Because when it flew away, I saw the red tail. So there is a light morph red-tailed hawk compared to a dark morph red-tailed hawk, okay? Now, this is also a red-tailed hawk. Wait a minute, I don't see any red tail. Well, that's because this is a first year or a juvenile or immature bird. The first year red tails don't have red tails. They have brown tails with bars on them, a brown barred tail. And their tail in the immatures is usually a little bit longer than in the adults, but see, This tells you it's a Budio right here. You can't see the tail beyond the wingtips. But how do I know it's a red-tailed hawk? Well, you can be 90 to 99% sure by seeing dark, light, dark. Remember? Dark, light, dark. There's your mantra. Even though it doesn't have a red tail, dark, light, dark leads you to suspect that you'd be better than 95% correct if you say it's probably a red-tailed hawk. What about this one? Ooh, a brown barred tail. That's an indication it could be a first-year red-tailed hawk. When it takes off, there you go. Patagial marks, dark leading edges, and then dark, light, dark under here if you can see it. But those dark leading edges tells you that's a first-year red-tailed hawk, okay? One of our most common Budios. Now, within any population of birds, there's usually a fair amount of individual variation in the plumage. Just like here in the human population, we all have tremendous individual variation. We don't all look like each other unless we're identical twins. So here are some what we call morphs of red-tailed hawk, starting from light morphs over here through what we call intermediate or Rufus morphs all the way up into the dark or melanistic morphs. Look at how different they can look. The amount of darkness on the belly band can differ. The amount of melanism can differ and so on. Even if you take a look at the tails, look at the backside of the birds. That obviously is an immature one. So is that one. So is that one. But even in the adults, look at the variation in the plumage of the tails. This one tends to have more bars on the tail than this one. That one's got a few bars. So there's individual variation in the population. And you have to learn to expect that when you're looking at just about any hawk in northern Nevada. Notice too, all the white that shows up on the backs of these birds. A lot of beginning birders get confused when they see all this white on the head, white in here and up on the scapulars and so on. Those are just the tail, the feathers underneath the dark feathers showing through. Don't let them throw you, okay? Look for the dark, light, dark pattern or the red tails to identify red-tailed hawk or the brown barred tails on the immatures. Okay, let's go to hawk number 2, Budio number 2, the rough-legged hawk. These guys are called rough-legged because their feathers go all the way down the legs down to the toes, giving them kind of a rough look. Budio lagopus. These guys come down here in the fall and hang around through the winter. They breed way up here in the tundra. And then they come down here into the lower 48s for their winter range. How do we tell them apart? Well, from a red tail, easy. Look for a whitish head, sometimes with an eye line. And another key characteristic is that they have a white base to the tail, which you can barely see here. But when they're flying and landing, then you get a good look at that white base to the tail. And then depending upon the age and the sex, there may be 1 or 2 or 3 or more bands at the tip of the tail. So look for whitish head, white base to the tail. That tells you rough-legged hawk. And again, you're not going to see them at this time of the year. They're here in the fall and the winter. They probably come down here sometime, about November or so. And then they'll leave sometime around March and go back north, okay? But again, there's individual variation in the plumages within the population. But look for that white band of the tail and a whitish head, okay? Whitish head, this one looks kind of grayish because of the way the light's hitting it. Often a dark belly band, usually a light breast, and 1 or more stripes on the tail with a white base of the tail. In flight, band at the end of the tail, white base of the tail, looks whitish underneath, light breast, dark belly band maybe, a whitish head, and look out here. This area where they got the bend of the wing, that's the wrist. Recall from biology that the carpal bones are the bones that make up the wrist, so we call this the carpal mark. This is characteristic of these birds' underwing pattern. Carpal mark out at the bend of the wing on both wings, okay? So compare that to a red-tailed hawk in flight. I think it's pretty easy to tell the difference. There's the red tail on the adult. Here you've got a white base to the tail and all this whitish with the carpal marks versus the patagial marks and the dark, light, dark pattern on the red-tailed hawk. So that's the rough-legged hawk, our winter visitors, versus the red-tailed hawk, which are resident birds here all year round. Perched, look at that white head. And man, sometimes it can really look white. I remember once telling my class of students, hey, get out. You're going to see the best look at a bald eagle you've ever seen. And we jump out of the van and everyone's looking around wondering, where the heck is that bald eagle? What we had was a rough-legged hawk, and the head looked so white to me from a distance, I made the mistake thinking it was a bald eagle instead. So I think in the winter and the fall, rough-legged hawk should be easy to tell from even a light morph red-tailed hawk. Whoops. All right, tell me why this is not a red-tailed hawk. Well, your first instinct should be what? There's no dark, light, dark pattern. This is what we call a Ferruginous hawk. And it is really white underneath with a pale head, sort of light grayish, may not necessarily be whitish, but rusty shoulders and rusty on the shoulder and on the back, practically all white underneath. They occur all throughout northern Nevada. That word ferruginous means containing iron oxides or rust. So what it really means for our purposes, it refers to the reddish brown or rust colored, like you see here on the shoulder of this perched Ferruginous hawk. Rusty colored and some rust on the back. Notice in the adult, the rust even comes down onto the legs. These guys are about 20 to 26 inches tall. Here's a back look at a Ferruginous hawk, that pale head, the rusty shoulders and some rust on the back. And notice the light tail, okay? There's no brown tail with bars, there's no red tail. This is a Ferruginous hawk. In flight, they look whitish underneath. The adults will have what we call rusty leggings. The rust goes all the way down the feathers that go down the leg. There's the very light tail. Whitish underneath, some rusty markings on the underwing, but no dark patagial marks, no dark leading edges. Here's a close-up of an adult coming in for a landing. This is what I refer to as the rusty leggings going all the way down there. Some rusty markings on the belly, some on the underwing, but a lot of white and a very pale whitish tail. On the upper wing, you see this rusty shoulders extending all the way to the back. And out here on what we call the primaries, you get this whitish look that kind of looks like a white crescent on the upper wings as it flies away. And again, the very pale tail. If you've got a first-year immature Ferruginous hawk, boy, you're going to see a lot of white. They have hardly any of those rusty markings underneath. So look at all the white on this guy. White, white, white. Immature or first-year Ferruginous hawk. So every time I see a Budio sitting out there and I see white, a lot of white, I think white, 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 I immediately start thinking Ferruginous hawk. There's one in the sky compared to a red-tailed hawk. There's one perched compared to a red-tailed hawk, okay? Ferruginous hawk versus the red-tailed hawk. And again, the Ferruginous can be around all year, unlike the rough-legged, which only comes down here in the fall and winter. Now, spring and summer, we can get this migrant bird that comes up here and nests here in the summertime. This is called the Swainson's hawk, Budio swainsoni. These guys, they've got one of the longest migration paths of any hawk. They can go, some of them, all the way up into Alaska, then migrate all the way back down again and all the way down into Patagonia, all the way down to the southern part of Patagonia, and then come back again into Argentina and Patagonia. They can occur when they're breeding here in the spring and summer throughout most of central and sometimes part of western Nevada and eastern Nevada, and even down here. Generally, for years, if you wanted to see Swainson's hawks, we usually had to drive out to the Fallon area to see them, where they still are common out there. But in the last couple of years, we've actually had a pair nesting out at University Farms, but I haven't seen them in the past year or so. So how do you tell a Swainson's hawk? First of all, if it's spring and summer, look for a dark head with white forehead and a white throat. And then this dark breast comes from down the head onto the breast. We call it a bib. And then a light belly, in a light morph anyway, with perhaps some horizontal barring like that. And then the tail is light with bands on it, okay? Very different from the red-tailed hawk. Dark, dark light, if you want to use that terminology. In flight, probably the major characteristic is you see this darkish head. To get a good look, you can still see a white forehead and chin and throat, but look for a two-toned wings. The light underwing covers, they are lighter than the darker trailing part of the wing, what we call the flight feathers, the primaries out here, the secondaries out there. So lighter underwing leading, darker feathers on the trailing part of the wing, okay? And as you can see, no belly band. Here's a intermediate or Rufus morph. You can see the white forehead, the chin and throat. It's more of a uniform color here because of the Rufus, but notice even here in the wing, the underwing coverts are still lighter than the darker primaries and secondaries. And then of course the tail with some bands going across it. This was the guy that was nesting out at University Farms a couple of years ago. Really a dark morph, but you can see a banded tail back there. And you can see a light forehead there. Unfortunately, the light chin and throat don't show up in this photograph. So tell me why it's not a red-tailed hawk. Well, dark, light, dark on our red tail, right? Well, darkish head, but all this white on the forehead and chin and throat, dark on the breast, but light on the belly. And then no red tail, banded tail. Our sixth red-shouldered hawk, six or is this number 5? Maybe I misnumbered it, I'm not sure. This is called the red-shouldered hawk, Budio lineatus. These are forest birds. They tend to nest in forested areas, but somewhere near water if they can, like a waterway, like a river. Well, they've been nesting out at Oxbow Nature Study Area for several years, and of course what they do is they go up and down the Truckee River hunting. These guys, red shoulders, because there's red on the shoulder there. There's reddish on the undersides, and they've got this horizontal kind of Rufus barring, lightish head, and the wings show this black and white pattern, and same with the tail, as I'll show you hopefully in a minute. When I first moved up here to Reno in 1970, nobody ever saw red-shouldered hawks, or at least I never saw any reported here in the Nevada, the Reno area. They're basically a eastern and midwestern hawk, although there is a population along the Pacific coast. But several years ago, they started nesting in Oxbow Nature Study Area. And so now we have them there. And so here you see that horizontal pattern here with some streaking there, Rufus coloration, some whitish in the throat there. Another look at it. You might be able to see a little bit of a white band on that short Budio tail and the black and white on the wings. These were taken at Oxbow. David Reynolds, thank you, loaned me this gorgeous photo of 2 red-shouldered hawks taken also at Oxbow Nature Study Area. And this black and white pattern on the wings always keys them off for me to tell me that they're red-shouldered hawk. It's one of the first things I look for. Kathy Fauclis loaned me these photos. Look at all the black and white on the wings and up here on the scapulars. And then there's that Rufus border, the Rufus barring again on the undersides, okay, with a pale head. Red-shouldered hawks. Banded black and white tail. If they're in flight, you see that black and white tail with all this Rufus on them, or a red shoulder, you know you've got a red-shouldered hawk. You probably won't see them out in open fields because, as I say, they tend to nest in forested areas and tend to move up and down waterways like our Truckee River. So those are the Budios. Now let's turn to the accipiters. Remember, the key here is that when they're perched, the tail extends well beyond the wingtips, like that, remember? Long barred tail beyond the wingtips as opposed to the Budio. So even if you saw one from a distance and didn't know what it was, that long tail should tell you what? Hey, I'm probably looking at an accipiter. So we have 3 accipiters here in northern Nevada, and in fact these occur all across North America, not just here. The smallest is the sharp-shinned hawk, about 10 to 14 inches. Middle size is Cooper's hawk, 14 to 20, and then the largest is the northern goshawk, up to 26 inches in the females. I'm going to start with the Cooper's hawk because this is the one that most people probably see more commonly. 14 to 20 inches. When it comes to the Cooper's hawk, if you've got feeders out in your yard, you may often see these Cooper's hawks coming in to try to capture food because they are known very well for preying on small birds. And you need to learn to recognize what are the immatures versus the adults. These 2 photos are immature Cooper's hawks. You notice they're accipiters because of the long banded tail, but yellow eyes and brown vertical streaking. That's all you need to know to tell you it's an immature. The overall back is usually brownish in color or sometimes grayish, as I'll show you, but yellow eye, brown vertical streaking. Keep that in mind. This guy looks kind of grayish, but brown vertical streaking and yellow eye. That tells you immature or juvenile Cooper's hawk, first year bird. Now here's an adult. The adults have this reddish horizontal barring, which reminds you of that Budio I just talked about, the red shoulder hawk. And as they get older, the eye turns orange and will eventually turn red, even deep red, as I'll show you in a minute. The wings and the head and the back start to take on this sort of a bluish grayish coloration. But all you need to know is orangish, or as I'll show you, reddish eye and horizontal barring, and you've got an adult Cooper's hawk. Here's one that's a little bit older and has that bright red eye. So orange or red eye and horizontal barring, rufous barring, you've got an adult Cooper's hawk. So there's an adult compared to an immature, okay? If anybody has any questions about that, send them through to Parker and we'll answer them later. Yellow eyes, brown vertical streaks, orange or red eye, horizontal barring. I don't know how many more times I need to repeat it. As I said, they are ambush birds. They like to sit in a tree or a bush and wait for small birds to come by, and man, they'll chase them, they'll even go into the bush with them and try to bring them out. Now, this is the sharp-shinned hawk. This is a smaller version of the Cooper's hawk. Looks just like the Cooper's hawks. Here's two adults, thanks to Steve Ting loaning me his photos. They're about 10 inches for the male and 14 inches for the female. Here's another adult. Here's this is another adult, horizontal barring, and this is an immature. Notice, just like the Cooper's hawk, yellow eye, brown vertical streaking. For the adult, orangish eye and horizontal barring. Now, trying to tell Sharpies, as we call them, from Coopers. This is considered one of the most difficult identification problems for even experienced birders. Sharpshins are smaller, Coopers are larger, but notice the sizes. Sharpshins, males may be 10 inches tall, females can be up to 14 inches. Cooper's hawk, females up to 20 inches, but look at that, males up to 14 inches. They're possible overlap in size. So sometimes it's difficult to tell whether you're looking at a female sharpshin or a male Cooper's. One thing that helps is, sharpshin or Sharpie starts with an S. When they approach, usually the tail is looking square tail. So S for Sharpie, S for square tail. Cooper's hawks, the tail is often curved when they're perched. So Cooper's starting with a C, curved starts with a C. Use that as your mental hook, curved tail, Cooper's hawk. Doesn't always work. I'll forewarn you now, it doesn't always work, but it's a good thing to try starting out. Here's an accipiter I had in my backyard one day. Okay, it's an immature, obviously. Brown vertical streaking, yellow eye, but which one is it, Cooper's or Sharpie? Well, I went out and I measured that post there. It was only 8 1/4 inches. So that plus the tail, I concluded this was probably, small enough to be a sharp-shinned hawk, okay? And I hope I was right. Now, other people have said that take a look at the head projection if you see these guys in flight. Supposedly on the sharp-shinned hawk, they have what they call a short head projection versus a longer head projection on the Cooper's hawk. In other words, the head doesn't stick out as far from the bend of the wing on the sharp-shinned hawk, sticks out much farther from the bend of the wing on the Cooper's hawk. Now, if you can learn to do that, you're a far better birder than I am, because I've never been able to tell that when these birds are flying by at rapid speed. And they may not always show a square tail or a curved tail either, so that's not 100% diagnostic either. Here's the largest of the accipiters, the northern goshawk. And you can see how big this guy is, females up to 26 inches. They are often used by falconers, as this guy here is a falconer, as you can see from the jesses. Here's one out in nature, thank goodness. Judy Duffy loaned me this one. Notice the adult that got this sort of grayish, bluish, grayish coloration all across the wings and back. There's the red eye, bold white eyebrow, or supercilium as we call it. That is the adult northern goshawk. There's a close look of that falconer here. Another characteristic is that in the Coopers and Sharpshin, the bands going across the tail tend to be straight, whereas in the goshawks, they tend to be wavy, probably more so in the immatures. So mostly grayish, look at the undersides, instead of that horizontal rufous barring, notice it's more grayish and brownish underneath. There is some faint gray horizontal barring and then all these vertical thin grayish streaks. So orange to reddish eye, a bold white eyebrow, grayish underneath. That's the adult northern goshawk. Here's one out in the wild, photo by Martin Myers. Thank you, Martin. Here is a immature northern goshawk, another one that Martin loaned me. Notice, just like the Cooper's hawk and the sharpshin, vertical streaking, yellowish eye. You know, sometimes the way the light hits it, that eye can look kind of bluish or even greenish, but it's a yellow eye with brown vertical streaking. And notice those wavy tail bands on the tail. Notice these streaks look like thick teardrops. Another way to tell it's a goshawk. Of course, just the size alone will start you to start thinking about northern goshawk. And even the immatures have sometimes a faint eyebrow like that. That helps you recognize them. These guys like to breed up in aspen groves up in the mountains, but in the wintertime, particularly if it's cold enough, they will come down and sometimes get into your backyards. I've had people take pictures of them in my backyard and send them to me. So there's the adult northern goshawk. There's the immature or young northern goshawk. All right. Which is which? Hopefully by now you know that long tail. What's that going to be? Long tail will tell you accipiter. Short tail, chunky body. That's a Budio. Okay. All right, let's move on. The falcons. The falcons have long, narrow wings that are pointed at the tips. When they fly, the wings tend to be bent back at the wrist. They have slender bodies and a long, narrow tail. The male is called the tiercel. The female is the one that's referred to as the falcon, and she's the larger of the two. So here, notice the pointed wingtip over here on the left. Notice the bent wing at the wrist on the right figure there. Here's a falcon, an American kestrel, typical falcon wing profile, chasing a larger Budio, in this case, a red-tailed hawk. Now we have four falcons that can occur here in northern Nevada. The American kestrel, which is the smallest of the four, a prairie falcon, which is bigger, as you can see, up to 19.5 inches. Merlins, which are about the size of kestrels, maybe a little bit larger, and then the peregrine falcon, sort of medium size in size. American kestrel, sometimes called the Sparrowhawk. This is our smallest falcon all across North America. These are males, and unlike the other raptors, these guys are actually dimorphic. The males can be easily distinguished from the females. Let's take a close look at a male. You recognize the kestrel by its small size, about 8 inches to 10.5. So this male will be about 8 inches. And these facial stripes usually key off these two pairs of dark stripes, black stripes bordered by white. The forehead is this kind of grayish coloration going across the side of the face. The top of the head or the crown is this rufous color, rufous on the scapulars. There's some spots on the underside, but notice blue wings, okay? Blue wings. That's all you need to know to tell a male from a female. Here's a female. The face and the head are identical to the male, but notice no blue on the wings. The female has what I like to refer to as a tiger stripe pattern. This looks like tiger stripes all across the back and the wings, and even stripes on the tail, which you can see here. So, blue wings, it's a male. No blue wings, female. So, blue wings on a male. Even the tails are different. Notice that the tail on the male is sort of this clear color with no bars, but black subterminal band with with white tips. Female, as I mentioned, has this tiger stripe pattern, these bars all across the tail, all the way to the bottom. So, male versus female should be easy to tell apart. Okay. Again, there's the male, blue wings, female, no blue wings. Another way to tell is that females have streaks on the underside where the male has spots on the undersides. Okay. All right, prairie falcon, much larger, 15.5 to 19.5 inches. And I always think brown and white, brown and white. Look at how white this guy is underneath with all these brown spots. They have a single mustache or malar stripe here that's brown in color. They occur all throughout northern Nevada. They like to be out there in open areas and nest on cliffs and so on. someplace where they got a clear view of the lowlands where they can go out and hunt. So here it is, that mustache, these brownish stripes on the underside. Another nice picture showing the mustache on both sides, or mallard stripes as we call them. Thanks again to Martin Myers for this excellent photo. In the air, if you see a fairly large falcon and you get the typical falcon pointed wings with slight bend at the wings, look at the armpits. If you see, these are called the axillaries, these feathers, but we'll call them the armpits. If you see dark armpits on a falcon, you know you've got a prairie falcon. That's another diagnostic characteristic of prairie falcons, dark armpits. Other than that, they just look kind of brownish and whitish. All right, our third falcon is the Merlin, sometimes called the pigeon hawk because their flight resembles that of a pigeon. Key here is that they're about the size of a kestrel, and it's easy to mistake them for a kestrel. They'll show up more commonly here in the wintertime than during the summer, and you see them sitting on a post or something, and you think, oh, there's a kestrel up there. Take a close look in the wintertime. They do have a slight mallard stripe, which is not always very easily seen, dimorphic like the kestrels. The males tend to have all this bluish coloration on the upper sides. Notice the black and white tail. Females have a brown and white tail. Remember, kestrels don't have that kind of a tail. So here's a male Merlin. Here's a female Merlin. She's got all these brown streaks on the undersides. I don't have any pictures of Merlin, so I had to steal these from the internet, and I apologize. They're not the best pictures I could find, but there's a male showing how bluish he looks, and there's the bold, banded black and white tail. There's a female. Notice a little eyebrow on her. There's a little bit of eyebrow on the Merlin too. Can't really see that mallard stripe there. She's got this brown vertical streaking and brown and white tail. There they are in flight. Again, pictures taken from the internet. So let's compare the Merlins to the kestrels. 8 inches to 10.5 inches versus 9 to 12 inches. So these guys are a little bit bigger, but you can mistake them at first glance for a kestrel if you don't check the face pattern. See, the face patterns are much different. There are none of those facial stripes like the kestrel has. And this banded black and white or brown and white tail, which the kestrel doesn't have. And this obvious striped back and wings on the female kestrel looks very different than on the male and female Merlin, okay? Our last falcon is the Peregrine Falcon, often referred to as the duck hawk, because they often will take ducks as prey, as you can see here. Probably the key on them, first of all, size. You know, they are 16 to 20 inches, so they're certainly much bigger than even the Peregrine Falcon, the Prairie Falcon. The adults have this kind of bluish grayish coloration again along the back, sort of a light rufous with striping on the undersides, but this, what they call a broad mustachial stripe. It kind of looks like it gives you the impression of the bird wearing a helmet, often referred to as a helmet. The juveniles are brownish, but they still have that kind of helmet look on them too, with brown vertical streaking. Here's a photo that I've taken off the internet. You can see even from a distance when the bird is perched, you can see that broad mustachial stripe on the immature. It doesn't look quite as broad, but it's brownish versus blackish bluish on the adult. Peregrine falcons are also often used by falconers, as you can see with this juvenile here. In flight, again, if you're lucky, you can see the helmet look on them, and you see all these streaks and striping on the undersides and on the undersides of the wing and so on. There's the bend of the wing, the kind of typical falcon profile to the wings. There's the helmet look again that is diagnostic for a peregrine falcon. These photos from the internet show that bend at the wing very well, that typical falcon bend at the wing. These guys, the peregrine falcon, they can disappear up into the sky. I mean, they'll just go up as high as they can, disappear from view. I once went out with a friend who was a falconer who had a peregrine falcon. He released the bird. It went up into the sky until I couldn't even see it. It just disappeared. Then the falconer released a pigeon, and all I could hear was this whoosh. This guy came screaming down from out of nowhere. They can do a stoop that's been clocked at over 200 miles per hour. So these guys are considered the fastest birds on the planet. And they come down, and what they'll often do is with their closed claws, they will bam the bird in flight, presumably a duck or a shorebird, stun the bird, knock it down, then go down and pick it up and take it off and go feed on it. These guys like to nest on high perches, and there have been a number of places around North America where they've put out these nest boxes for peregrine falcons, and the peregrines will nest way up on these high buildings. This is in the Woodman Life Tower in Omaha, Nebraska. But we've actually had, in the past, we've had some peregrines roosting on the Grand Sierra, top of the Grand Sierra, back when it was called the MGM. And recently, they've been spotted on top of the Capitol building in Carson City. So keep an eye out for them. And there are a lot of people that will spend the breeding season actually watching these guys and watching their chicks and hoping that nothing happens to them, and hoping that the chicks will fledge and so on. And in fact, one of our LES members, Debbie Zelmana, every year she goes always to the Bay Area, and she joins a group of people that constantly watch some peregrine falcon nest on some of the tall buildings over there. So she's what did she call it? A falconista or something like that. Good going, Debbie. All right, moving away from those guys, let's go to the next raptor on the list, of northern harriers, sometimes called the marsh hawk. These guys have a slender body with a long tail, long, relatively narrow wings. They usually hold their wings in a shallow V, and they hunt in open country. The characteristic that keys you off to them is what they call the white rump, which is really not the rump at all, it's the upper tail coverts. But another key characteristic is if you get a good look at the face, they have owl-like facial discs. So going away, there's a white rump on what looks like a female northern harrier. If you get a good look at the face, thanks to Steve Ting for these features, look at that. That looks like an owl. Those look like the facial discs of an owl. If you're not familiar with facial discs, remember a great horned owl or a long-eared owl, all these feathers that form a sort of a circular ring around the eyes, that's called the facial disc. Well, look at these guys. That looks like an owl's facial disc. So does that. Thank you, Cabby, for your photo. They will, as I say, hunt over open country. You'll see them kind of gliding along, maybe just hanging in the air like that. I've even seen them with this shallow V that I mentioned, just right near residential areas. And there's the white rump that keys them off. The white rump on that long tail, which is really, as I say, not the rump at all. It's the upper tail coverts. This one is a female. The females are brownish. There's that distinguishing white. Males are grayish with white underneath. Here's one down on the ground. These guys get up to 19 and a half, well, the males up to 15 and a half. There's the whitish rump, supposed rump feathers. These guys have often been referred to as the gray ghost, the gray ghost. And when they're in flight looking for something to eat, notice how they keep the head down. That facial disc, just like owls, these guys hunt as much by sound as they do sight. They're not only looking for prey, the facial disc there, those feathers help to funnel sound towards the ear, so they're listening for any rustling in the underground. But notice black wingtips and all white on the underside of the wing, and mostly white on the undersides, except for the grayish on the breast. And there is the distinguishing right, supposedly what they call the white rump, but is really the upper tail coverts, okay? The gray ghost. And when these guys go streaming over some marshlands, all the other birds start taking flight. They even hang around in the wintertime. When I first saw this guy, I swore I thought it was an owl at first. I had to take a second look and realize this was a male northern northern harrier sitting in the snow. So there's, and I look at the underside of a male northern harrier. This one is either a female or an immature. The females have heavy brown streaks on the breast and flanks, whereas the immatures are very, very cinnamon yellow and only streaked on the breast. So this one could be an immature, I'm not sure, but again, you can see the owl-like facial disc on it, the northern harrier or marsh hawk. Let's move on to the osprey. The ospreys get up to 25 inches in length with a wingspan that approaches 6 feet in the females. Notice, mostly whitish with this brown stripe going through the eye, white on the undertail coverts. The wings are primarily whitish with barring on them, a short barred tail. Here's one that's caught a fish. The osprey, Their main food item is fish. They will dive for them. Notice this big, broad eyebrow, or eye line, as we call it, going through the eye and then coming back over the neck there. Notice all whitish underneath, short tail. Notice how they're grasping the fish. They'll grab a fish and they always carry it head first. Any idea why? Aerodynamic efficiency cuts down on drag on the fish when they're taking it. These guys have a degree in mechanical engineering or aeronautical engineering. These are the ones you often see hovering. They will hover while they're looking for food. And then if they see something, spot something, man, they dive head first, splash into the water. This guy came up, empty-handed. This one, however, did catch a fish. Now, one advantage that osprey have is, you know, most birds have 3 toes forward and 1 toe backward, and these guys too, but they can reverse the front toe, so they can put it backwards. So they got 2 toes on the front of the fish, 2 toes on the back. That gives them a much better grip. Now there is, if you want to see ospreys, you can go along the Truckee River, go out to Mogul, and if you're out at the Mogul exit on Interstate 80, you look to the south, and there is a 2 big electrical power poles out there, and there's been a long-standing osprey nest out there. They've been nesting out there for years, and so in the spring and summer, going out there to the Mogul exit, get off of I-80 and find a parking space somewhere out there near Mogul, and you'll be able to see a pair of ospreys raising young, okay? The osprey. And then, of course, we get eagles. One is the golden eagle, always named for this golden area on the back of the head. This area here, the back of the head or the neck, is called the nape. They have a golden nape. These guys get up to about 40 inches in length in the females. And they occur all through Nevada year round. Again, they'll nest, big nest up on, usually up on cliff sides somewhere, and go out and hunt for large mammals for prey, like rabbits and so on. And then there's always a chance for a bald eagle in winter. And in the wintertime, you can see bald eagles can occur throughout most of the state of Nevada. We now have a nesting pair that actually nest down there in the Minden-Gardnerville area. They're in a rancher's field just on the south side of Genoa Lane. And if you ever go down to River Fork Ranch, where the Nature Conservancy has bought that ranch, and they have a visitor center there called the Witt Interpretive Center. When the Witt Interpretive Center is open, just go in there and they'll actually set up spotting scopes for you in the breeding season, and they can actually show you these breeding bald eagles down there in Genoa Lane. So these guys, anywhere from 5.5 to almost 8 feet wingspan. These are one of the largest birds, of course, largest raptors we have here. And everyone recognizes it by obviously the bald white head. Actually, bald in Old English meant white. It's not really a bald head. Obviously, there's feathers there, but the word bald meant white. So it's the white eagle is what that means, white head and white tail. And there's that big wingspan when these birds take off. And of course, you all know this is our national symbol, the bald eagle. But this is a bald eagle. And that's a bald eagle. And that's a bald eagle, right? How the heck do I know those are bald eagles? Well, that's because it takes 5 years for a bald eagle to become an adult, to get the adult plumage. When they start out, when they come out of the nest, they're mostly dark like this. The bill is black, the body is brown, and the belly is brown. Then during the 2nd and 3rd year, maybe start to get a little bit of white showing up on the head. Maybe they even start to get a little white on the belly. The bill slowly starts to turn yellowish around the 3rd year or so. And by then they get this eye line here that is often referred to as a Zorro mask, you know, like our old hero, the Zorro. And that shows up very well during the 2nd and 3rd, and sometimes even the 4th year. By the 4th year, the bill is almost all yellowish. The white is disappeared on the belly. Bird's getting brownish all over, getting whitish in the tail. White in the head, but still maybe a bit of an eye stripe there. Then the 5th year, you finally get the characteristic white head, white tail, and all brownish body. A lot of people think the body is black, but it's not. It's really brownish. If you see the bird in the air, the juveniles, look at all the white on the undersides. There's white in the tail all the way through the juvenile to the first, second, third year, and then mostly white in the fourth year. But look at all the white on the wings up there in the armpits, white armpits up through 3 years. That helps you key them up. And then this white bar that goes along the lower, the underwing covers. And then white out here in the secondaries and some out in the primaries. There's just white splattered all over the undersides. The amount of white tends to diminish in here during the first and third years, but you still have the white armpits and that white bar on the underwing coverts during the first and third year. Fourth year, there's the Zorro mask showing up there in the third year. And then mostly it's starting to look brownish underneath with only a little bit of white. The tail is getting to be more and more white as you get towards the end of the fourth year. And then finally, the adult plumage in the fifth year. So I'm going to contrast that with a golden eagle that always kind of looks like this, with that golden nape, no matter what its age category is, juvenile through adult. From the geographic guide, this shows what an immature golden eagle looks like, a juvenile. The adult can have actually some white and brown bands in the tail, which most of us don't ever seem to really see. But the immature has got white base to the tail, and then white in the underwing, but it's confined to out here, usually the outer primaries. And whoops, sorry about that. The outer primaries and sometimes the secondaries, but you can still see the nape golden there. Compare that to the immature bald eagles and all of that white that I told you about on the undersides of the wings, some whitish on the belly, more white in the tail, and so on. So look for this small amount of white in an immature golden eagle versus all of this white in a juvenile or immature bald eagle. Now here's that immature golden eagle that my friend Doug Canham photographed. When he and I looked at it, we thought it was a immature bald eagle because of all the white here, but once we got the photo on the computer, you could see the golden nape here. So there's the characteristic white base to the tail. There's the white out here in the outer primaries, and then some are extending along in the secondaries here, which just goes to prove that birds don't read the books. Just because our books say they're supposed to only have white out here. Again, individual variation in the population. And it's not always easy to be sure. When I first saw this bird, I told the group, that looks like a golden eagle. I mean, really brown, really big. In flight, I still thought it was a golden eagle. What I neglected to do was look at the nape. There was no golden nape. And then when the bird lifted its wing, what did I see? Man, look at that. The white armpits and that white bar across the tail coverage. Okay, so what does that tell you? Not a golden eagle at all. That's a subadult bald eagle. Okay. Now, I want to finish up by talking about turkey vultures, which are not raptors, but I want to talk about them for a reason. You know, large birds, they're not predators, they're scavengers, as you probably well know. Females can get up to 28 inches in length, and you recognize them by that red naked head. Maybe you often see them roosting or sitting with their wings out like this to absorb heat from the sun. But when they're in flight, they have what we call a two-toned underwing pattern. If you can see the naked red head, you notice it's turkey vulture, but sometimes you can't tell that from a distance. But the way the light hits it, it's basically light grayish here, but sometimes the light can make that and the tail look white. So you think you got a black and white bird. Don't be fooled. It's really just light grayish. It depends on the angle at which you're looking at the bird and the angle at which the light is hitting it. They often occur in what we call kettles, several of them circling together, just riding in a thermal updraft. And they have what we call that dihedral flight pattern that I mentioned when I was talking about the marsh hawk, a shallow V. Okay, but notice the two-tone pattern. The underwing coverts are dark black, primaries and secondaries, the trailing part of the wing look much lighter. And when they're coming at you or going away, you see this shallow V. And it's this shallow V that I want to emphasize. Because if you have a golden eagle coming at you from a distance, I mean, there are times where I have seen a large black bird coming at me from a distance, and I could not tell, was that a golden eagle or was that a turkey vulture? Well, notice golden eagles have more of a horizontal flight pattern, okay? More horizontal. They may have a slight shallow V, but not as much as the turkey vulture. So look for a horizontal flight pattern on a golden eagle, either going away or coming at you, versus a turkey vulture having a more emphasized dihedral, shallow V. Okay? Shallow V for the turkey vulture versus a horizontal flight pattern for the golden eagle. Oh, and by the way, turkey vultures, if you see them, the juveniles first year have a black head. They don't get the red head until their second year. Okay, so remember, we're looking for dead birds. If you find any dead birds, do what I told you to do and contact me at my email address or my phone number. Okay, all right, thanks for your attention. If there are any questions, I'm sure that
Okay,
will have them for me.
Here is our first question, Alan. What's the average life expectancy of bald eagles? Somebody asked.
That's a good question. As a general rule, the larger the bird, the larger the age, the longer they live. Geez, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years. I'd have to look that up, to be honest with you. That's a good question.
Yes,
you know, Parker?
I'm looking that up on the National Audubon website, and they
didn't
just
have it?
got the time when they fledge and the time when they lay their nests.
Okay.
And,
Any other questions?
Yes, well, I have a question here for you, Alan. I was wondering, what are some great parks here in northern Nevada to see Ferruginous hawks and northern goshawks?
Let's see, northern goshawks. Well, maybe I should stop sharing my screen for the moment. Northern goshawks, I say, go up to find aspen groves up in the mountains somewhere during the breeding season. That's where you'll see them. Sometimes they can come down into the valleys during the winter, and just look for them. If you've got feeders out, look for them in your backyard. I have had people send me pictures of them, of a northern goshawk in their backyard during the wintertime. But basically, this time of the year, you'd have to get up into the mountains to look for them. By now, I'm sure they have young in the nest. They may even have fledged the young by now, so you might even get juveniles. But go up into areas where you've got aspen groves. They tend to prefer aspen groves for nesting. So that's where I would go look for them. And what was the other one?
The Ferruginous hawk.
Ferruginous hawk, okay. They seem to like short grass fields. And whenever I lead my field trips to Sierra Valley, either in the fall or in the spring, and we get out up there where short grasses in some of the fields, that's where we tend to see Ferruginous hawks. I've been told that out in most of Nevada where they occur, they breed in anything they can find, short shrubs, tall trees if they're there, but sometimes I've been told they even nest on the ground. So you want to get out into the central part of Nevada and eastern part, just look for them in open fields. That would be the best place to look for them.
Here's a question. Does the Reno area have more hawks than most places?
I would say no, I don't think so. Depends on what you mean by most places.
Like your average cities and communities in the United States.
Cities are not going to have a whole heck of a lot of hawks, obviously. We've got to get into the proper habitat. So for any of the Budios, you want to get out where there's some open area. Having said that, however, for decades, there's been a red-tailed hawk that's been nesting in Central Park in New York City, and they've even made a documentary about it. So even here in Reno, you can find red-tailed hawks and Cooper's hawks in housing areas. Get some tall cottonwood trees somewhere, anywhere near your house, wherever your house is, and you're liable to see a red-tailed hawk nesting up there, building a nest. Cooper's hawks, as I say, can come by in anybody's yard where you've got feeders out, because they are looking for small birds to feed on. So I would say, yeah, red-tailed hawks, Cooper's hawks, they can occur in just about anybody's backyard or front yard, if you put it that way. So yeah, they can be in residential areas too. But basically, for most of the hawks I've talked about, the Budios and the accipiters, you probably need to get out into the open areas. Anything else?
Yes, somebody says, thank you very much, Alan. I always learn so much from your talks.
Well, great, glad to hear it. And if anybody can stick with me for a few more minutes, what I'd like to do is, if you're really interested in learning how to identify hawks, let me give you some suggestions. You want to identify hawks, just get any one of your guidebooks and turn to the section that has raptors in it, the hawks. Start learning to identify them there by looking at the illustrations in any of those guidebooks. And there's numerous guidebooks out on the market. But if you really want to get into hawks, here's one called A Photographic Guide to North American Raptors by Wheeler and Clark, published in 1996. So I don't know if it's still available. I would imagine it is. The Peterson Field Guides has got one about hawks. That one was published in 87, and I'm sure they've updated it since then. 2005, Jerry LaCorey published Hawks from Every Angle, which is a good resource. And one of the best ones is a 2013 book by Richard Crosley and Jerry LaCorey and Brian Sullivan called The Crosley ID Guide to Raptors. And then really detailed book by Brian Wheeler called Raptors of Western North America. He even has one to Eastern North America. And the Department of Wildlife used to, I don't know if they still do, they had one called Biological Bulletin Number 8, Nevada Raptors, which gave you a little bit of information, but nothing like these other books. For example, the Wheeler and Clark book, North American Raptors, they take each raptor, devote a chapter to it, give you photographs, different photographs of that raptor. Here they're doing a Northern Harrier. The Hawks from Every Angle by Jerry LaCorey, same thing. They devote a chapter to each species, descriptions of the different light morph, intermediate, dark morphs, and so on, photographs of the birds, different angles, and so on. The Crosley ID Guide, this one, they'll take each species and they'll have illustrations of the bird at different poses, different distances, kind of like the way you'd see them out in the field. And this is really a great guide for learning to identify hawks at different angles, different distances, and so on. There's rough-legged hawk. The previous one was, that was what, red-tailed hawk. Here's the rough-legged hawk. Notice all the different types of illustrations. And then if you really want to get into it, Brian Wheeler's books, Raptors of Western North America. If you really want to find something with lots of range maps and lots of pictures of different plumages, different morphs of each individual species, Wheeler's got him, man. He has traveled all across North America taking photos of hawks. And if you really want to find something to help you go to sleep at night, you can read all the details in all of his really detailed chapters. Whereas the Nevada Raptors one is really a very, very simple one. And as I say, I don't even know if it's still in print. So there's some suggestions for anybody who really wants to become more expert at identifying hawks.
Okay, our last question is best guess as to where to find an American Kestrel.
Best guess to find an American Kestrel? Oh, just drive around University Farms, or drive down into Washoe Valley or go up to Sierra Valley. Any open field where you've got some telephone poles, telephone wires, just go through those areas, right? Take, what do they call it now? The road that goes through University Farms. I forget the name of it, but you drive through there and just look at the telephone poles, telephone wires. Just drive south out of town where you've got some open fields. Again, look for the telephone poles, telephone wires. Go on down into Washoe Valley, do the same. You'll probably pick up a Kestrel somewhere along the line. Same thing up in Sierra Valley. One thing about Kestrels is they have what I call their own individual space. They always, you can never get too close to them. I always try to get close enough to get a photograph, and as soon as I get close, too close, bam, they fly off. So, so you sort of have to look at them from a distance. But yeah, open fields with post, fence post, telephone poles, telephone wires. fence wires, and so on. Any of those habitats would be good for seeing the kestrel. Okay.
Wonderful. Yes. Well, that's our last question. There have been plenty of comments and questions that are praising you, Alan. People have loved this presentation. They find it super informative. So
okay, someone on chat said, you know, if where to find kestrels, go along Veterans Parkway. Yeah,
yes.
Good suggestion, whoever that was. Thank you. I forgot about Veterans Parkway. That'd be another good spot.
Mhm.
Okay, I hope I haven't kept you all too long.
Nope, not at all. Well, once again, thank you everyone for attending, especially to those of you who are still on the air. We've had so much fun listening to Alan, and do check in. We will be having one more presentation in our Birds of Truckee Meadows webinar, which will be again on Wednesday, and we will be welcoming Mike Goddard, who will be sharing his presentation all about shorebirds. So you definitely don't want to miss Mike Goddard's presentation. Until next time, everyone, have a good evening.